What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I will be setting up my fantasy cruncher for tonight's showdown slate between the Commanders and the Bears. This is for DraftKings, and this is for the largest field GPP on DraftKings. Some of the steps I take here I would not do if I were playing small field GPPs or cash games. I wouldn't, for example, use players with very low projections. I wouldn't set a salary maximum if I were playing cash games or very small field GPPs, but for the largest field GPPs, this is how I would set up my fantasy cruncher. And the first thing I'm going to do on this slate, because it's two bad teams with low projections, we've got a low total. I kind of want to see what the optimal lineups look like and what kind of salary they use. So I'm going to just crunch out 10 lineups right away to see the salaries that come out. And I see right away the top projected lineup uses the full $50,000 salary cap. 49,200, number two, 48,400, 48,000. So some of the top projected lineups on this slate actually do leave a good bit of salary on the table. So maybe factor that in as you are deciding what your salary cap should be. If maybe you want to leave more salary on the table, or maybe you don't feel it necessary. For me, this probably means I'm just going to leave more salary on the table. I also think that this is just a good slate in general to leave salary on the table. And the reason being that none of the players on this slate project extremely well. Even the top projected plays on the slate in the flex spot is Justin Fields with a 17-point projection. That's pretty low relative to some of these showdown slates where we see players with, 26, 27-point projections, and those players are very likely to be in the optimal lineup. None of the players on this slate project extremely well, and it's also probably going to be a low-scoring game, which means that there's more opportunities for less expensive players to jump into the optimal, even if, we see Darnell Mooney get more target share for the Bears if that's 4 catches and he's not the one who gets into the end zone, and instead we see Equanimous St. Brown, gets less target share and only has 2 catches, but one of them is for a touchdown. He can outscore Darnell Mooney in that scenario. Whereas sometimes we have slates where, if it's the Chiefs and the Bengals, we've got a lot of players who are going to be getting a lot of targets and they're going to be racking up fantasy points. Even if they don't score a touchdown, it's going to be harder for cheaper options to outscore them even with a touchdown, just because of, the PPR that you get for every reception. So players who are more involved are just more likely to be in the optimal in higher scoring games where the offense is more condensed. In this game, we don't really have extremely condensed offenses, and we've got pretty low scoring is what I would expect. So I think we have more opportunity to potentially leave some salary on the table. One thing that I'm going to do in this main screen before I get into the advanced options, I'm just going to set a cap on my exposure for all captains, and I'm going to set it at 20% for this slate. Some slates I will set that to 10%. Some slates I will allow certain players to get up to 100% in the captain spot. Maybe Lamar Jackson, probably the best example there as a player that I've done that in the past. On this slate, for now, I'm going to set it at 20%. I might go and change this one actually to 10% later, just because I don't think there are any real smash spot captains in this game. So maybe I want to spread it out more. But for now, I'm going to leave this at 20%. And I'll go into advanced options. Right away, unique players per lineup is set to 1 as the default. I'm doing 150 lineups, so I'm going to leave that at 1. I can have lineups that are very similar to each other. If I were playing 20 or fewer lineups, I would probably set this to 2, just to make sure I've got a little bit more diversification within my own lineups, more shots at first. Team salary, I don't set a minimum. I do set a maximum. The reason being, I want to get different. I don't want to have lineups that everybody else is going to be using. That top projected lineup that I showed you that uses $50,000 salary, that's probably going to be duplicated kind of a lot tonight. I don't want to play that lineup, because that lineup, if it's duplicated 200 times, best case scenario, even if you have all the luck in the world and that lineup wins, you're only winning like $5,000 or $6,000. I would rather play lineups that if they win, I'm going to win, $50,000, $100,000. ideally $1 million, have a little bit more upside in the event that you do win, because it takes a lot of luck to win on Showdown, regardless of how well your lineups project. So I'm going to leave a little bit of salary on the table. As I said, I think this is a spot where you can leave a little bit more salary on the table, just because the lines are a little bit more blurred between the top plays and the mid-level plays and the weaker plays on the slate. Of course, the last two times I've said that, the lineup has ended up using close to $50,000 salary, because we've seen those players, the top projected players, being the ones who score the touchdowns. So doesn't always work out, but and then when you see that, then you see the winning lineup duplicated 200 times. I actually like to see that. I love to see the winning lineup duplicated so many times that everybody's splitting $5,000, because that just shows me that when it doesn't work out that way, my lineups are more likely to be unique and probably have better opportunities to win a lot of money. Hey guys, if you're a new Stokastic Plus Platinum or NFL user and want to give our NFL DFS tools a test run before purchasing, we have a great offer for you. Get access to all of our NFL DFS tools 100% free for 3 days. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools for NFL DFS that we have to offer on Stokastic.com, including new tools such as our lineup generator and player compare, as well as player projections, ownership projections, top stacks, our boom bust tool, and so much more. Click the link in the description of this video below to join to activate your 3-day free trial now. Please note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included with this trial offer. Offensive players versus defense, I'm going to set that to 5 players. I don't mind having 5 players from one team versus the defense from the other team. It seems thin because, if 5 players are coming from one team, it probably means that team is scoring a lot of fantasy points, which does hurt the defense from the opposing team. But two things can be true. That team can put up enough fantasy points to support 5 players from it. At the same time, the opposing defense can cause a few turnovers and maybe score a pick six. And although it hurts the opposing offense, it can still happen that the defense picks up those points while the opposing offense scores a lot of fantasy points. And particularly in a game like this, where there might not be that many touchdowns, I wouldn't expect a ton of touchdowns. The team that has 5 players from it might not even actually score that many points. They just might, have a lot of PPR points and score points without actually putting points on the board, just because there might not be many points to go around. So I don't mind having 5 players from one team versus the defense of the opposing team. I'm going to leave this at 100%. You already saw I changed my captain exposures to 20%. So I have a 20% cap on all players in the captain spot, but everybody else I could theoretically get up to 100%. Of course, if I did see that, I would probably go back and change that, because I don't think I want 100% from any player in this game. Randomness, currently don't have it on. I'm going to turn on use randomness. Now I'm using normal distribution randomness, which means that in general, when Vantage Cruncher is crunchy lineups for me, most of the projections for players, even with the randomness, are going to be closer to that center median number that I have for a projection. Whereas if you're using classic randomness, it is entirely random. Whatever you set it to, it can be anywhere within that range. So if you're using classic randomness, you might want to set it a little bit lower. But for normal distribution randomness, I'm going to keep it at 50%. It's also all about how much control you want over your lineups. The more control you want, the less randomness you use. I don't mind giving up some of that control in order to make lineups that other people are less likely to have. So I'm going to set it at 50%. If you're using classic randomness, maybe I'd try 30 or 40%. I'd set it a little bit lower. And if you want more control, obviously set it lower as well. Minimum projection included in calculation, the default is set to 3. That means that any player with a fantasy point projection below 3 is not even going to make it into your player set as players who can be considered in making lineups, even with randomness on. So you could set that lower. I'm probably going to go in and actually change. Actually, because this game is so low scoring, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just change this to 2 right away. And so now I can get players who are, anything 2 or above fantasy point projection can make it into my player set. We'll see if I end up getting to those players. I still might need to adjust projections a little bit later on, but I'm going to change that to 2. Players from each team max, I can have 5 players from one team. I don't mind that at all. I kind of like onslaught lineups. They go a little bit underrepresented by the field, and they still have pretty good win equity. So I don't mind having 5 players from one team. Okay, that is everything that I do in the general tab. Now we'll go into the groups tab. Create a couple groups, starting with the Justin Fields in the captain spot group. going to go down and right away find Fields in the captain spot. Make him my key player. He's going to be the only key player in this group. So the entire group is focused on lineups that have Justin Fields in the captain spot. Now I'm going to add his pass catching options to the secondary group, starting with Equanimous St. Brown, Dante Pettis, N'Keal Harry, Darnell Mooney, Amir Smith-Marset, Felix Jones, Ryan Griffin, Trevon Wesco, Cole Kmet. Now these Bears running backs, they're not extremely involved in the passing game. David Montgomery has not scored a single receiving touchdown since Justin Fields took over at quarterback, but they're involved enough, especially in a low-scoring game, that I think I am going to include them in this group. Actually, maybe not. I'm not even going to do that. And the reason is, so I'm not including the running backs. The reason being that for the Justin Fields group, I'm not even going to require one of these players to be in it. Justin Fields hasn't had a ton of great rushing games in his career. He has only one game in his entire career where he's rushed for 100 or more yards. So he hasn't shown that rushing upside that frequently, but it is clearly there. We have seen it at least once in his young career, and he also, regularly rushes for around 50 rushing yards. So I think he has the upside to have a spike week rushing where he doesn't necessarily bring any pass catcher along with him. So I'm going to only apply plus minus adjustments. The reason being, the reason I'm not including running backs in this group is that I don't think I would even be giving them any kind of a boost in lineups with Fields at captain. So I'm just going to only apply plus minus adjustments. So now I could theoretically have a lineup that has Justin Fields in the captain spot and doesn't have any wide receivers or tight ends in the flex spot. But I am going to give these guys a boost so that they're more likely to be in lineups when I have Fields in the captain spot. Because in general, I'm still going to want to have Fields paired with some receiver, one or two receivers in the flex spot. I'm just allowing for the occasional lineup that has Fields in the captain spot with no receiving options in the flex because he does have some rushing upside, pretty good rushing upside. All right, and that'll do it for my Fields group. Again, I'm only applying plus minus adjustments, so I could get to lineups without any of these players, but I'm more likely, because I'm giving them boosts, to get them. And this number, this 12% boost that I'm giving, it's art. It's not science at all. I will go back, look at what my lineups look like, and if they're not coming out the way I want, if I'm not getting enough of these guys in lineups that have Fields in the captain spot, I'll probably increase this boost. If I'm ending up with lineups that have Fields in the captain spot and then 4 of these guys in the flex spot, then I'd go and probably reduce these boosts. But this is kind of a good starting place for me in general. All right, now I'm going to make a Wentz captain group. So I'm finding Wentz in the captain spot, making him my key player. He's going to be the only key player in this group. So this entire group is revolving around lineups that have Carson Wentz in the captain spot. So I'm going to add the Commanders pass catchers to the secondary group. So that'll be Curtis Samuel, Sims, McLaurin, Diami, Milne. And for this group, I'm happy to include the running backs. J.D. McKissick and Antonio Gibson in particular have been more involved in the passing game than the Bears running backs have been. Okay, good enough. So we've got Wentz in the captain spot. Now, the key decision point here, I think, is do you require 1 or 2 players in the flex? You're going to want to have at least one. Carson Wentz does not have huge rushing upside. He rushed for little over 200 yards last year, and he played a full 17 games. So doesn't have a ton of rushing upside, but he could, of course, always fall into the end zone, have a short rush. He is capable of a QB sneak at the goal line. So you don't necessarily need to have 2 players in the flex spot with Carson Wentz at captain. It is my preference. So I'm a little bit torn whether to just change this right away and say at least 2 players from this group. I think I'll leave it at 1 and then just give these players boosts to make it more likely that I get to 2 with Wentz in the captain spot. I also think if I were playing, 20 or fewer lineups, I probably would just set that to 2 and require that I get at least 2 of these players in lineups with Wentz in the captain. I might give a little bit of a smaller boost to Curtis Samuel, actually, just because he already projects very well for his salary. And he also is high enough salary that you're at risk if he has a really great game of outscoring Carson Wentz, and then he would be the optimal captain at significantly cheaper price tag. Uh, the same concern sort of applies to Terry McLaurin because of the price tag, although he doesn't project quite as well. So maybe I'll give a slightly lower boost to Terry McLaurin as well. But all these other guys, I'm going to start at a 12% boost. And I'm still going to give a little bit of a boost to these guys as well because they are pretty involved in the passing game. All right, so I'm only requiring one. That might be something I go back and change later, just depending on how my lineups come out. But I think this is a good starting place. I don't think I'm even going to make a Fields flex lineup because I think that there is the potential there for Fields to, put up, even if he only has 50 yards rushing, that might be enough. If the Bears don't put up a ton of points, if they're not really scoring points, but he has 50 yards rushing, he might be just the highest scoring Bears player, and maybe in a 5-1 lineup where it's 5 Commanders players and just 1 Bears player, Fields being the top scoring player for the Bears might be enough, which he could do via the ground. So I'm not even going to make a Fields flex group. I'm going to allow that to happen. Maybe after I see my lineups, I'll want to go back and give boosts to Bears players if I have Fields in the flex. But for now, I'm just going to make a group that's for Wentz in the flex. So I'm going to go down and find Wentz at quarterback, make him my key player. And then I'm going to do the same thing I did before, which is adding all of his pass catchers. The only difference here being that because I have Wentz in one of the flex spots and instead of the captain spot, I am actually going to have to add all these players to the as captain players as well to the secondary group. So McLaurin, Gibson, Samuel. All right, I think it looks good. Guess I'll add all these guys. All right. So now with Wentz in the flex spot, I think that unlike Fields, I don't think it's very likely for Wentz to make it into the optimal lineup in the flex spot without one of his receiving options outscoring him. So I think that I'm going to require. So I'm not going to click the only apply plus minus adjustments. I am going to require that at least one of these players be in every lineup that has Wentz in a flex spot. And you could consider: do I want to give boost to some of his receiving options? Terry McLaurin. Maybe I'll give a slight boost to some of these receiving options in the captain spot, just for a little bit of positive correlation. But you don't necessarily need to. This makes it more likely that I am correlating. I say in my article that I sometimes like to have lineups that have a pass catcher in the captain spot without their quarterback in the flex spot. And that's not because I don't like the correlation. There's obvious correlation between quarterbacks and wide receivers. So in general, that lineup is going to do better. If you have the pass catcher in the flex spot, most likely the quarterback is, or in the captain spot, most likely the quarterback is also having a good game. But I think those lineups are a little bit over-owned in large field GPP. So in some of my lineups, I like to see a pass catcher in the flex spot without the quarterback in the captain spot without the quarterback in the flex spot. But there is still positive correlation there. So in general, I don't mind seeing the quarterback in the flex spot when I have a pass catcher in the captain spot. And this is just making, if you give these boosts, you're making it more likely to have Carson Wentz in the flex spot when these pass catching options are in the captain spot. All right, good enough. Those are the only groups I'm going to make for now. And I'm just going to see what my lineups look like when I crunch them. I've already set this at 20%, so I think I'm all good to crunch. Okay, so Bears captain. Yep, don't mind this. So you can see I've got Carson Wentz correlated with Curtis Samuel. I do see right away I have a lineup with Justin Fields, and it has David Montgomery as a pass catcher. Doesn't have any other Bears pass catchers in there. That's not ideal in general because David Montgomery is not extremely involved in the passing game. You prefer to have a receiver or a tight end when you have Justin Fields in the flex. But again, I think that Fields does enough on the ground, has enough upside to have a spike rushing week that I don't totally mind this lineup. I think that this correlates well enough that this isn't going to be a lineup that makes me change my settings. Here we got Fields in the captain spot with Darnell Mooney and David Montgomery. Like to see that. We do have the Commanders defense on the other side. Slight negative correlation there. Obviously, between the quarterback and the opposing defense, there is negative correlation there, but it's not so negative. It's not negative, I think, to the extent that the field thinks it is, just because, you could see Fields throw a pick six or, another Bears player fumble it and it's recovered by the Commanders defense and they score a touchdown. Now the Bears get the ball back right away and they're in a better game script for passing the ball. So I don't mind at all having quarterback in the captain spot with the opposing defense in a flex spot. That's not something that I want to group out. Here we've got Wentz with just Curtis Samuel and the Commanders defense in the captain spot. I think that's fine. Again, we have Fields with just Montgomery, so not always getting a ton of these Bears receiving options. But in general, I don't hate any of these lineups individually. If I got too much of, for example, just Fields and Montgomery with no pass catchers, which I am seeing quite a bit, it makes me think about at least going back and making a group that gives a bigger boost to some of those other pass catchers in lineups that have Fields in the flex spot. I don't think I'm going to do that just yet, but it's something that I will consider doing later just because I'm seeing so many of these lineups that have only Fields and Montgomery in the flex spot with no other Bears pass catchers. Something to think about. But first, I'm just going to look through my individual player exposures in the captain spot. Who am I getting a lot of? Fields, Montgomery, Wentz. That's not a surprise. Getting a lot of them in the captain spot. Samuel, Bears defense. Interesting. So this is without me making any adjustments to any projections. These are the players I'm getting in the captain spot. Getting to a lot of Justin Fields in general. He is currently in 95% of my lineups, 20 in the captain spot, and then 75 in the flex spot. Don't know that I want to get to 95% of Justin Fields. It's not the worst thing in the world just because he has upside both on the ground and throwing the ball. But 95% is steep. Maybe I'd go back and cut down his projection at some point if this holds up. But first, I'm just going to look through each position, see how much I'm getting of everybody. Dave Montgomery clearly projects far better than every other player on the slate. So not a surprise. I'm getting 69% of David Montgomery in the flex spot and then another 20% in the captain spot. That's more than I'd like. I'll probably cut back on that a bit. One way to do this just naturally would be to go back into the advanced options and cut back on my my cap. So if I change this to 48,600, maybe I get a little bit less of those most expensive players. I've already set a pretty restrictive cap on there, so I don't necessarily want to take that approach, but that is one way to get less of the extremely expensive players if you're getting to too much. Not getting into a ton of JD McKissick. I'm going to sort by salary here. All right, so not getting to any Antonio Gibson. His projection relative to his salary is just atrocious. It's a three-headed monster now for the Washington backfield, but still, I don't know, 18% Antonio Gibson is what we're projected for ownership. Is he still going to be involved enough to theoretically pay off that 8,600? I mean, what this is telling me is the full fade of Antonio Gibson is certainly viable tonight. I don't know that I want to do it across 150 lineups, so maybe I'll just give him a little bit of a projection boost to try to get to some Antonio Gibson. But honestly, it's not wrong. If you want to full fade him, that might be the right approach. Khalil Herbert getting 13%, kind of same story. He just doesn't project that well for his 6,200 price tag, but 13%. Maybe I want to get to a little bit of Khalil Herbert. My guess is that I will. I'm going to try to get to some of these guys. Maybe I'll try to get to more of McKissick as well. It's not entirely sure what approach I'm going to take with these running backs tonight. I don't know Jonathan Williams' status. I'm not sure that it matters with Brian Robinson back. My guess is that he's not involved, so I'm not even going to give him a boost to his projection. I did change Blossom Games. As you can see, he's projected for 0.89 fantasy points, so he could not even get into my lineups right now. I'll have to change this to 2 fantasy points, which I set as my minimum threshold to be included in lineup sets, so I could at least theoretically get to some Blossom Game. Wide receivers, not getting to any Terry McLaurin. I think I'm not going to like that. I think something I'm going to do tonight is try to get to a little bit more Terry McLaurin, although I was kind of hoping the ownership would come in lower than it is. He is getting 31% ownership. He has not done a whole lot this year, unlike Curtis Samuel, who has been crushing it. I think I might try to flip these and get to more McLaurin than Curtis Samuel and just hope for a game where, McLaurin kind of takes over as the wide receiver one for the Commanders when the field is, at least a little bit lower on him than they are on Curtis Samuel. But so I'll give him a little bit of a boost. 25% Darnell Mooney seems fine. I might get less now that I've given a boost to Terry McLaurin. You have to keep in mind that all of these projections are just relative to each other. So if you're giving a boost to one player, that lowers everybody else's projection relative to that player that you gave a boost to. Diami Brown coming off a big game last week. Maybe I want to get to a little bit of Diami Brown, Equanimous St. Brown, Velus Jones. Currently not in my pool because he has a projection below 2 fantasy points. I think I'd like to try and get to some Velus Jones, speedy rookie. Played his first game last week and scored a touchdown on his very first touch. But I think he played 3 total snaps. So it is a relatively thin play if you want to play Velus Jones. The only reason that I'm going to do so is because he's projected for very little ownership and he's a rookie. Maybe he gets a bigger role this week. Cam Sims. These are guys that I think I'm just going to give a little boost to just because of the low ownership and because I don't think it would take much to be in the optimal. So I want to give myself a chance to get some of these players in my lineups. Smith Marset, same thing. Keel Harry. Maybe Dax Milne. Give him a little bit of a projection. All right, not getting to a ton of Cole Kmet. That makes sense. He has not been great so far this year. But maybe I'll give, just because I'm giving projection boost elsewhere, I want to still get to some Cole Kmet. So I'll give him a little bit of a boost. Ryan Griffin, maybe I'll give a little bit of a boost. Last week we saw Cole Turner made his NFL debut and was fairly involved in the Washington offense. So at 200, he looks pretty good. But as you can see, just project for a little over 3 fantasy points. Certainly not out of the realm of possibility that he puts up 0 fantasy points tonight. He could possibly not be involved at all. Maybe John Bates just takes over, or the reverse could happen. Maybe Cole Turner takes over and John Bates kind of gets relegated to the bench. We don't really know what to expect with these guys. But if the field isn't going to be there under 8%, maybe I do want to get to some Cole Turner. So try to ensure that I get more there. Kickers, I mean, this could be a game that, it's 12-9, and I would not be surprised at all. So maybe I want to get to a little bit more of these kickers. And defenses, as you can see, getting to a ton of the defenses. That makes sense. Both of these offenses have given up 8 turnovers each so far, which is both they're in the top 10 of the league in terms of turnovers given up. So it's a good spot for these defenses. Could be a low scoring game. Getting to a lot naturally of these defenses. The field is also there, 23%, 24% for these defenses. I am not going to adjust these projections right now, which means I'm going to most likely get less of them because I've given boosts elsewhere. I'm not giving boosts to these guys, so to the defenses. So relative to other positions, now I have essentially lowered my projection on these defenses, and now I'll crunch it again. Still getting pretty similar. Yeah, actually getting to about the same amount of defenses. So I guess I didn't give big enough projections elsewhere to affect how much I'm getting of the defenses. Getting a little bit more of the kickers. That's good to see. Still getting a lot of Cole Turner, no Ryan Griffin. Not the end of the world for me. I don't really know how much Ryan Griffin I want to get to. I'll probably end up trying to get above this 2% mark just because he's so low owned, but not a huge priority for me. If I want to get to some Armani Rogers or Trevon Wisco, I didn't even give these guys boosts. I guess I could and see what happens. Getting to a bit of N'Keal Harry making his season debut for the Bears tonight. Good. But in general, this is just my process. I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you right now, make all of these player decisions. I'm just kind of trying to show you my thought process as I'm doing this. I'm just looking position by position, looking at how much I am getting of different players. What projection do I have for them relative to other players? I can see here Equinemius St. Brown, Diami Brown, not getting much, not getting to any of Equinemius. Need to give little boosts here if I want to get to more of them. Velus Jones, not getting any there. Maybe I give a little bit of a boost. But not going to go through the whole process, just kind of showing you need to be looking at if you are making changes to projections, which not necessarily something I recommend, especially if you're new, because these projections are great. Like these are the best in the industry. They're a big part of my process is looking at the Stokastic projections and then also looking at the single game tool and seeing how often players show up in the optimal lineup, how often they show up as the optimal captain relative to ownership. These are the things I'm looking at when making these decisions. So I'll be going back and forth between this and here and helping me kind of form how much I want of various players. But I might end up crunching 30 times before I'm done. So I'm not going to go through all of those 30 crunches with you right now. Just kind of showing you the kind of thought process I'm having, which is looking at how much am I getting of a player? Do I want to change that? How much do I need to change their projection relative to other players? And of course, I do this position by position because I find it a little bit easier. You know, you could also, if you wanted to, you could just click on this flex button and look at all of the players here and you can actually get a better sense of how players project relative to other players at different positions in the same kind of price range. I just prefer to look at it position by position. Anyway, that is my general process as I am making my lineups. Just going to crunch several times, figure out do the lineups look the way I want them to in terms of correlation. Again, right here, we see Justin Fields with just David Montgomery, Justin Fields and David Montgomery. Maybe I'll go in and give a little boost if I have Justin Fields in a flex spot to other Bears pass catchers that are not David Montgomery, just to make it more likely when I have Justin Fields in a lineup to get to some of these other Bears pass catching options. So I'm not always just Fields and Montgomery, but clearly Fields and Montgomery project the best. So it makes sense that they're going to be in a lot of lineups together. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. Good luck tonight. I hope you can find some success using this or a similar process.